So, welcome. My name is Ann Merchant, and we are very glad that you are here with us this week. This is the last event for our, I don't know, what are we calling it? The summer season, Rick? I think something
Season
like
three,
that.
I believe.
Season three. Okay. It is called Ritual for a Reason, New Habits in the Time of COVID. And we are really excited to have someone we love here with us, Cristine Legare, because she does incredibly interesting work. We were spending so much time talking to her in advance of this. We thought, oh, we got to get the event started. But I think our routine is kind of ritualized at this point as well, Rick. So this is the point where I say it is now your turn to introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Rick Lovert. I am the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. And so the other part of my ritual is that I usually try to find some things that are sort of relevant from the Academy's work to today's topic. And I went on to the NAS website and I looked up ritual and couldn't find anything. So instead, I went to the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is our journal. And in fact, I got something like 267 results when I typed in the word ritual at PNAS. And they had titles like Underwater Ritual Offerings in the Island of the Sun and the Formation of the Tiwanaku State, Synchronized Arousal Between Performers and Related Spectators in a Fire Walking Ritual, Stable Isotope and DNA Evidence for the Ritual Sequences in Inca Child Sacrifice. So I think you kind of get the idea. I will not read all 267 of these entirely fascinating articles, but Sachi will put a link into the chat and you will be able to go to PNAS and do your own search. So I think that, of course, one of the reasons we were so excited about having Cristine here is that she's going to talk about some things that we don't get to hear about every single day. So that's fun for us. And of course, there's plenty of ritual in film and television. I think there are certain tropes that we see play out all the time. My husband has his own personal rituals. He uses his favorite TV show, whatever he's binging at the time, to be his ritual to go to sleep. And when we used to go to movie theaters, I can remember that time. I couldn't possibly watch a movie if I didn't have a bucket of popcorn in my lap. So I think there's lots of ritual around film and television.
Yeah, and in these pandemic times, I'm still doing a lot of that too. Whenever we watch a movie at home, I always make sure there's gum on my living room floor. Just relive the ritual of it. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about the Science and Entertainment Exchange. So if you're a writer, producer, director, studio executive, actor, and you have a question about science or engineering or medicine as you're making a piece of mainstream media, you can call us. We will connect you to an expert who will hopefully have the answer to your questions. And we've done this over 3,300 times on TV shows and films and documentaries and video games. So if you are a STEM professional and you are just learning what we do, please do contact us. We're always looking for volunteers. I had a couple people email me this week. I still have to get back to you. My apologies, but we are always looking for people who are interested in getting involved. I got to thank our sponsor today, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, for making this event possible. We also get major funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and individual donors like you. Thank you so much for everybody who joined today at the supporter level. We are going to have one of our VIP Q&As after this. So if you are an exchange supporter, or if you clicked the little like I want the VIP Q&A, then you should have received a link that will send you over to VIP Q&A for some bonus time. I want to thank Courtney Sloan, Sachi Gerben, Jeff Fishman, and Moises from our AVU department. Without this, we could not make these events happen. Today's event, one speaker will be speaking for 20 minutes. We're going to call it 20 minutes. And then I'm going to pop back on. I'm going to be the voice of you, the audience. So if you have a question at any time, including right now, you just put it into the little Q&A thing down here, and I will be fielding as many of those as humanly possible during the event. And then for those of you who have signed up for the VIP Q&A session, you can go on video and ask the question yourself later if you would like. And so every week we get lost in something while we're researching the event. My thing this week was a Forbes list of daily rituals for success and productivity. I am doing very few of those things, especially the sleep. So I'm going to try to, this is like an aspirational list, but Sachi's going to put it in the feed for you.
I thought you would actually have been doing more of those because I could check off a few of them, but you have a 2-year-old. So that's disruptive to a lot of those things. So you have a good excuse.
I have a
He's your
2-year-old,
excuse.
a cat, and a golden doodle. I'm not sleeping ever.
No, none of that's going to work then. Well, I actually was thinking about the rituals that I have sustained during the pandemic. And the ritual that I continue to engage in, there are others, but is listening to podcasts. And I don't do it on my morning commute, but instead I do it on my morning walk. And I've been listening to something that's called On Our Watch. And it's really interesting. I highly recommend it. It's a limited series, so I don't know how many episodes they'll have in total, but it is basically about the internal affairs investigations. In California, they have a new law that says you can have access to those investigations. So it's how the police themselves. Wow. Fascinating and super frustrating, but I do recommend it. So those are our rabbit holes this week. And actually, I think that this is a rabbit hole of the topic today because Cristine Legare is just one of the most fascinating researchers we have had the pleasure to work with in the past. She was at one of our retreats previously, and she was recommended to us by the Templeton Foundation, the John Templeton Foundation. And that's how we became aware of Cristine's work. And we were just thinking, we want something a little different, something to end our season 3 with that doesn't always, as I said before, kind of map to the institution's content. So the first thing that we thought of was, Cristine, turn on your camera and come out here because we know that you have some really interesting things to say to us because you always keep us fascinated. So we're ready for you.
And here I am, ready
just
to
like
deliver a little something different.
And we know you'll make good on that. So we're going to go away and we're going to let you do that something different while we sit and listen and be part of your audience.
See you in about 20 minutes.
That sounds terrific. It was such a delight to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is rituals. And one of my goals is to expand your concept of ritual and in ways that sort of deepen your understanding of what rituals are, maybe problematize some of what you think rituals are, and teach you more about how rituals can improve your life, deepen your relationships, help you understand people better. So that's my goal. I'll be talking a little bit about ritual in the context of COVID-19 because it was really a unique opportunity to understand how rituals change, why they persevere, why we adapt them for particular purposes. And it's really revealed, I think, how fundamental ritual is to human psychology, human nature, and human culture. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, we know that COVID has disrupted many aspects of all of our daily lives. That would include rituals, both the sorts of rituals that people often think about when they hear the word, like, I don't know, esoteric religious ceremonies or things like that, but also a great variety of our everyday mundane rituals or habits in ways that I think has made clear how pervasive these behaviors are. Rituals are, in fact, such a pervasive part of human life that we often are unaware of when we are engaging in them. And one of the side effects of our rituals being disrupted is actually showing us what our rituals are and what they're for. So this pandemic experience has opened up unique opportunities in the US, but also much more broadly globally, to adapt rituals, both personal rituals such as habits, as well as collective rituals, to meet new needs and respond to new challenges, of which there are a great many. So let's start with a little definition. There's scholars who spend their whole careers trying to define what ritual is. And I thought I'd make it easy for you with a very straightforward and simple definition. So rituals are, quite simply, they're social conventions. They are socially shared, socially stipulated practices And there's a great variety of them. So these, as I mentioned before, they range from things like religious ceremonies, baptisms, mitzvahs, simple greetings like handshakes on the more mundane end of things. So these big collective ceremonies, as well as, really, in fact, seemingly sort of trivial things like greetings. I gave a talk, I guess it's been a couple of years ago now. The past year and a half has been sort of vanished from my from my memory in many respects, but it's been a couple of years. I gave a talk at an interdisciplinary venue on ritual, what the functions of rituals are. And after I gave the talk, and an economist asked a question. He's actually, I think, a member of the National Academy. And the first thing he said was that, oh, this is interesting stuff, but I don't personally have any rituals. I don't engage in any rituals. And it surprised me because, as I pointed out to him, what he and I were doing right at that moment was a ritual, and was certainly ritualized. So academic talks, academic environments, ceremonies, this is all deeply ritualized. The fact that we have the shared consensus that one person should stand up in front of the room and go on and on and on about a particular topic, and everybody should stay silent for this period of time. And when you want to ask a question, there's a protocol and a procedure for that, which is slightly different when you're in person. We've already gone through the rituals for how to ask questions in this modified academic-esque ritual format. So, what was interesting to me about that comment is it revealed that what his expectation for what rituals are things that are maybe irrational things other people do, not things that he does, but in fact, our lives, our everyday lives, whether you're religious or not, are absolutely full of ritual. That's kind of what I meant when I said that we often don't recognize that we're engaging in rituals because they're such a deep and natural part of our lives. It's also one of the reasons that when we travel, we often notice ritual. Because they're rich, they're not our rituals, right? They're different. So if you travel to another country, you are immediately confronted with a great variety of different ritual practices, and feel quite a sense of motivation to at least acquire enough knowledge of those rituals that you can sort of participate. So if you've been to Japan, for example, you might hopefully feel compelled to engage in the kinds of shoe-related rituals that accompany entering a home and leaving a home and changing rooms within that home. So all of these different practices are examples of rituals, and visiting new populations is a good way to see, oh, wow, in fact, not only does this population have a whole variety of different rituals that are really essential to participate in order to have effective social interactions, a lot of what we do also is ritualized, and we just don't happen to notice it. Again, because we're so familiar with it. So I study what rituals reveal about the human mind, about our nature, and about our culture. And one, I think, critical take home from this talk, I hope, is that rituals aren't irrational, they're not arbitrary, they're not random. They are highly functional. There's absolutely essential reasons that we have them. There's a reason that all human cultures, rituals are human universals. Absolutely all human cultures have rituals. And there's a good reason for that. So what I want to talk about next is the functionality of rituals, which I think is really important for people to know, because a lot of this information, I think, can be harnessed or leveraged in your own personal life, in your interactions with other people. It's absolutely essential in the space of social and behavioral change, right? If you want to have any hope of introducing new behaviors, it's really, or rituals, for example, it's really essential to know what the existing rituals are and what they're for. So I think this information is useful on any number of different levels. We talk a little bit about what rituals are for. So rituals they mark critical rites of passage. So all major rites of passage in the human lifespan have rituals associated with them in absolutely all human cultures. So that would be, critical life events like birth, obviously, childhood, adolescence, puberty, marriage, workplace or kind of professional related rituals, childbirth, having families, death obviously is associated with lots of different sorts of rituals. So people often think about ritual in the context of these critical life events. And rituals in those contexts serve lots of important functions that range from things like initiating a new member of a new human into a family or a community, helping a new family or new parent transition to a new form of identity, such as parenthood, which is quite a consequential new identity to have. It also, these kind of collective shared practices and ceremonies, say, for example, in the context of birth-related rituals, allow a community or a family to have a shared set of activities that promote bonding, that promote social cohesion, cooperation, solidarity. So, I mean, this speaks to, in addition to kind of marking these critical rites of passage, this speaks to other functionality of ritual, which is promoting solidarity, promoting group cohesion. A lot of these family practices, family-related rituals that we engage in surrounding important life events, or transitions, or holidays, ceremonies, that kind of thing, are really a deep part of people's identity. It's part of how they think about their family, their culture, their ethnicity, their religion. And if you've been married and you've been in a situation where you have attempted to kind of merge the rituals of your family with your in-laws, you might find, even if you share the same faith or you come from the same ethnic background or tradition, even if your rituals are relatively similar, small differences between these rituals can seem insurmountable. I had an experience recently. A friend of mine conveyed how she and her new husband had I would say, pretty substantial disagreement about whether presents should be opened on Christmas Day or on Christmas Eve. And there was, let's just say, a lot of family strife surrounding something that seems pretty trivial. So it might be hard to understand, why do these small, seemingly unimportant, like just small behavioral differences, why do they matter so much to people? The only way you can understand that is is really to realize that these behaviors associated with rituals are tied to people's identities, right? And a big part of ritual is the psychology of ritual resists change, right? Because they're part of identity. The functionality of ritual is to preserve groups, to preserve communities, and thus resisting change is kind of part of the structural fabric of ritual, which is why even people often resist even small, kind of silly, meaningless changes to rituals. These practices are tied to identities. They're tied to emotionally meaningful memories and experiences. So you find yourself trying to kind of puzzled over why people care so much about such small details. It's because the actions are small, but the meaning is big. So that's why. So rituals, again, they have this identity function, they have this social cohesion, cooperation function, but they also have this a cultural transmission function. So rituals, because they kind of resist change and they preserve group-related identity and practices, they're ideal kind of meaning-making systems for transmitting group identity over time. So if you think about this in the context of organized religion, this is why you have, you can go to a Catholic Mass is just one example in one of many, many, many different countries in the world. And you'll know, if you've been raised in that tradition, the roughly when you're supposed to stand and when you're supposed to kneel, and the gestures you're supposed to perform, and in the words you're supposed to say in many cases, even when you don't speak the language, the ceremony happens to be performed in. So it creates this this kind of unifying behavioral repertoire for members of communities, and supports the transmission and the persistence of these practices, and thus this group's cohesion and identity over time. That's a really core part of what rituals are for. So just a bit about their functionality. So what I want to talk about, or kind of transition to next, is the pandemic, and specifically how the pandemic has forced us to change many of our most common rituals. And there's a couple things that I want you to consider. One is that most of the rituals that the pandemic has affected, and it's been, many, right? Rituals, if most aspects of our life are ritualized, and the pandemic has disrupted, nearly all aspects of our lives, of course, there's going to be a lot of impact on our rituals. But one thing to note is that there are very few rituals that we have omitted, that most of the rituals that have been impacted, we've modified and we've changed. So have we gotten rid of the kind of academic style talk and how it's scripted and the sort of form that it takes? We haven't. We put it online. We've recreated it in ways that adapt to this kind of new technology, because the functions that these rituals serve are still things that humans need, that we crave, that we desire: the social interaction, the social cohesion, the reminder of shared purpose and identity. So let's talk about things like rites of passage. So these are very common rituals, things like baby showers, birthday parties, funerals, right? They, of course, many have been postponed, but they've also been transformed into virtual celebrations. I've been to virtual baby showers, birthday parties, and funerals recently. So these are all, we still need these critical life events to be commemorated, to be respected. And early on in the pandemic, one of the things that I found a little bit distressing is, I think, a lack of compassion for young people who were having their prom disrupted, or their prom was canceled, and they weren't able to attend their high school graduation. And some of this news coverage sort of portrayed this as, sort of a selfish protest that, there's bigger, matters at hand, and being bummed out you couldn't go to your prom or your graduation seems kind of self-involved. And on one hand, I appreciate that sentiment, but I think that misses a really critical point, that graduating from high school it's a community event. It's not just about the individual. It's a big accomplishment for the whole family, as is a college graduation, and in some cases even a preschool graduation. Isn't this funny? We graduate from preschool now. So we ramped up the rites of passage associated with academic transitions, I suppose. But it does speak to, these aren't just, they're celebratory, but they also are about, confirming a collective investment in this young person's educational and professional and personal development. And these are things that we can postpone, but not having the opportunity to celebrate these events, and also to transition. Again, the transition, and having that transition, I think, is really important. It's also why rituals associated with things like marriage are critical. It's not just about the party. The party's fun. Everybody likes the party. But it's also about changing the status of lots of people in a family, not just the bride and groom, or the brides and the grooms, or it's about the role that the relationship between families, the joining of families and changes in identities. So all of those kind of transitional moments we still need, even if we can't celebrate them in person. So again, the functionality and the need for that remains, and that's why we're motivated to change our rituals. There's also the sort of need to announce these events to other people. We see that there's whole new rituals in the kind of social media space surrounding advertising, graduations. New industries have popped up. You've seen these new lawn sign businesses that advertise 6-year-olds' birthdays and graduations and things like that, where it just speaks to how powerful our drive to share with other people, and rituals help us do that, right? It's why we want people to attend these ceremonies with us, is to share our share our joy and mark our or our grief in some cases, and mark transitions. So rituals are, surrounding things like greetings and social support have also changed. So it hasn't just been the ceremonies and the rites of passage. We know that handshakes and kisses on the cheek or the lips, physical embraces and hugs have been replaced by elbow bumps, although I think that went by the wayside. Even our replacements for these rituals have changed over the course of time, given how unending the COVID experience seems to be. So we've replaced these greetings with the elbow bumps, the air kisses, the virtual hugs. Again, interesting and critical to point out, we haven't omitted greetings just because we can't physically be in contact with each other for safety reasons. We still, the functionality of the desire is still there, and we've just replaced them, and they serve different functions. One thing I also want to mention is that rituals are tremendously helpful in managing uncertainty. So during times of danger and uncertainty, unexpected outcomes like the pandemic, people often use rituals, collective practices to reduce stress and to exert a sense of control. Those things are deeply related. So another functionality of ritual is to exert control and reduce anxiety. So that's another reason why rituals are common in high-risk periods of the human life course, like birth. So if you think about the times in the life course that are especially risky, there's an extensive amount of ritualization associated with those transition points. It's also possible that the higher the risk, the more ritualization that occurs. Because again, this is a reaction to uncertainty, and it's very much about exerting control. If you find yourself engaging in more rituals than you normally would, or personal habits when you're stressed out, that's all you using ritual to exert control and reduce some of your anxiety. Not that all people react that way, but that might be why you decide to overhaul the entire cleaning of your house when you are worried about something else. Let's see. So I want to give you one example of an initiation ritual called Chatti in northern India. And this is a ritual that occurs on the 6th day after a child's birth. And I think it reveals the multifunctionality of ritual, which is, again, one of the take-home messages here. So during this ritual ceremony, the mother and the child, they're bathed, they're fed with special food. Black thread is tied around the baby's waist or their wrist. Black eyeliner or kohl is applied around the baby's eyes. And a number of these different amulets and items are meant to provide supernatural protection, ward off supernatural threat like evil eye. And Chatti, this particular ceremony, it initiates the baby into the family. It garners supernatural protection, so it has that kind of risk reduction property. And it also reinforces social cohesion within the family, within the community, as as I mentioned before. And this global pandemic, like in some ways, like this transition ceremony, birth ceremony I mentioned, it's a time of a lot of transition and a lot of uncertainty. So it is not a surprise at all that we see a huge amount of ritual proliferating around, pandemic-related response. It's also a time when people need more physical and social support than ever before. So over the past year, people have used like electronic social media to rapidly transform their social rituals. That is exactly what we are doing right now, by the way. So these in-person rituals have been replaced, and new interactions, virtual happy hours, business meetings, distance learning classrooms. I have friends who have stationary exercise bikes, and they turn on Zoom and recreate a kind of a spin class environment, despite the fact that they live in 10 different states. Interesting that we feel compelled to do this. If we just needed exercise, we could just exercise ourselves, right? The fact that we even exercise is something we want to do together. It's something we want to do in synchrony, speaks to the deeply social nature of humans and what our social needs are. And rituals are deeply, deeply integral to our social nature and or the social fabric of our practices and our lives. One of the reasons that the pandemic, I think, has been uniquely difficult and stressful is that it's a normal reaction under times of uncertainty and stress to seek out physical and social support, to gather together with people you love, people that comfort you. And we've been deprived of that, right? This is one of the reasons it's not just the physical danger, the psychological duress that many of us have experienced is a product of being not having access to the same kinds of social support and coping mechanisms and rituals that we would normally go to in times of uncertainty and crisis, and explains why, rather than just omitting a lot of these rituals, we have changed and transformed them, and in some cases have created new ones. So I want to talk just a bit about some COVID-specific hygiene rituals. So the use of ritual to treat illness is pervasive around the world. It's also historically ancient. So there are ancient Egyptian texts of rituals to treat all kinds of different maladies, blindness, and what's probably something like tuberculosis, all kinds of different ailments. So humans are very used to using rituals to treat illnesses. One of the things I've written about recently is that you use the term ritual as a way to treat illness, you assume this means some kind of traditional superstitious practice, which it could mean that. But much of biomedicine is heavily ritualized, going into an office and interacting in a particular way and trusting in authority, wearing a white coat, and taking potions and pills this many times per day, not having really any understanding of how a lot of these different procedures and practices work, but doing it based on faith and authority. That sounds like a lot of religious rituals, like a lot of other types of rituals. So a lot of the term ritual, again, does not refer to something necessarily unscientific or irrational or traditional or other, again, they're social conventions, and all human activities are full of them. So ritual is everywhere, including the doctor's office. So another thing to mention on that front is that anthropologists believe that rituals may be part of a hazard precaution system, which is a psychological system geared towards responding to threats in the environment, such as things like pathogens, COVID viruses, for example, contamination. And since reducing contamination and promoting hygiene is essential to human health and survival, using rituals to spread these practices is really, really useful. So it's absolutely not a surprise that we ritualize hand washing and we ritualize sterilization and things like that. And that's nothing new. You think about rituals all around the world, both religious and secular. Hygiene is a big part of rituals for very, very functional reasons. So I just wanted to end with just a kind of final statement that there's very good reason that people spend time, money, and energy engaging in rituals in the face of COVID and in general. They're essential to meeting our physical, social, and psychological needs, particularly in the face of adversity. So thank you.
Okay, so we got a bunch of questions here. I'm going to start with one that I thought was interesting. Can you share with us some of the more enduring rituals throughout human history that you've come across?
Sure. So I can some I guess maybe rites of passage rituals I think are really fascinating. So in all human cultures, there are rituals surrounding transitions to adulthood. And these are really fascinating because they reveal what is deeply universal about human nature and human culture, but also they're a really unique insight into the different priorities and needs and values of different cultures. So although these transitions to adulthood, they vary, in terms of when they occur, right? There's even variation in things like what constitutes adulthood. I asked my undergraduate students recently what age they considered adult, like when they would be an adult. And if you're wondering what they said, it was 30. So that would not be representative of what most human cultures would consider adulthood. It might be 18, it might be 16, it might be 14. I don't know, maybe increasingly it's going to be 40, who knows? So there is a lot of variation there. But the functionality, this kind of need to move from more of an adolescent state to a fully actualized adult member of a population is pretty important, not just at the level of individual psychology, but also in terms of the public perception and how other people perceive you. That's why these rites of passage tend to be public and tend to be things that are communicated to others.
So David asks, are there other mammals, or I'm going to expand it out to just say other animals that engage in ritual?
Not like humans do. Certainly there's evidence that other animals engage in ritualistic or ritualized behavior that has some of the behavioral similarities to ritual, like rigidity, kind of a stereotyped aspect to it, repetitiveness, certainly synchrony. Absolutely, many other animals engage in behaviors that have aspects of ritual to them. But the kind of the collective unit of ritual with all of its social functionality is probably uniquely human.
So Regina wants to know how you became interested in this field of study.
I became interested in this because I am an avid traveler. And I've spent a lot of time traveling around the world. That Japanese example of the shoes, that's from me. They remind you of how, a couple of things. One, how pervasive rituals are, but it's also striking that we feel intrinsically motivated to partake and participate in the rituals of other communities in order to affiliate, in order to signal that we want to engage, we want to participate, that we're respectful of their rules and their expectations. And this is such a deep part of our psychology. I think I noticed when I was in Japan, despite the fact that I'm almost 6 foot tall, so the shoes for Japanese women were, let's just say, not the right size for my feet. So, and yet I still felt compelled to squeeze as much of my foot in there as I could. I also felt compelled to respect the shoe changes between rooms in the accommodation I was staying in while I was by myself. No one would notice if I didn't follow these rules and change my slippers. No one would have noticed. And I was diligent in following these ritual practices. So it's, I think it reveals just something fascinating about our nature. So that's how I got interested in ritual.
I think that, David asked about the line between personal rituals and social rituals. And
great question.
For example, toothbrushing and prayer before bedtime.
Yes. So that's a terrific question. Now, I actually think there were important differences, and a lot of what people talk about as ritual, I would call habit. So, and they're in terms of the behavioral features, there's a lot of similarities. So there's a lot of that, again, the repetition, the redundancy, things of that sort. They help organize your behavior. So they're similar in that respect. There are critical differences, though. In the context of toothbrushing, you could change whether you brush your teeth before or after you eat. And it's good that I don't know which you do, because if you don't do the same as me, I'll judge you. You'd be surprised at how strongly people feel about this. Anyway, you and I could both change that. If we decided, you know what, we want to only brush our teeth at night or before or after we eat, there's nothing of consequence other than the fact that it might irritate us for a while and be hard for us to remember to do. But there's no social consequence. In the context of social rituals, however, you're not the author of your own acts. These are socially created and shared practices. And these aren't things that individuals willy-nilly can change. It's not that individuals can't influence social practices. That does happen, absolutely. And that would be its own conversation to describe the context under which that does happen. But that's a critical difference. And these social rituals have very different functionality, right? They mark group identity. They promote cohesion. When you brush your teeth and go to bed, that's your business. It helps organize your own biorhythm in your own life, but you can change it anytime you want. Probably no one will care. So those are differences.
So Edward wants to know, what's the difference between a ritual and a custom?
A ritual and a custom. That's a good question. I think probably not much. I would say they're probably very similar. Yeah, I would feel absolutely comfortable. I mean, if I thought about it enough, perhaps I could carve out some a minor difference there, but I would say those are probably very similar, as well as like a social convention more broadly. Rituals tend to be, depending on the kind of ritual, can be much more elaborate than just a conventional behavior, of course.
So both Celeste and Kat asked a version of, we've got pandemic era rituals. What do you predict might be some rituals will keep and or change, or new rituals coming out, projecting into the post-pandemic era?
Yes. So I'll say my actual belief and my aspirational belief. So one thing to consider is that you can explain which pandemic-related rituals have taken off most readily based on what already existed in a population. So consider mask wearing in East Asia versus mask wearing in the US, especially early stages, right? Mask wearing is already a norm in East Asia due to bird flu and other experiences where people regularly wear masks on planes and when they're ill, right? Which is, a tremendously considerate thing to do, by the way. I've never, looking back, I can't imagine how it's normative and acceptable to go on a plane with a head cold and infect half the plane, forget COVID. But in the US, because we didn't have that norm, that was more of an uphill battle. It's, we've acquired the norm, but at least some of us, but it's been more of a struggle. So I think that the candidates for things that will persist, hope of, this is both actual and kind of aspirational, have to do with hygiene and things like greater awareness of your body and yourself as a potentially infectious agent. So I think some of those rituals will persist. I think that a lot of the distance greetings and that kind of thing will evaporate. We like physical contact. We like that kind of physical intimacy. The second that mask mandates were dropped in the city of Austin, people packed into these spin studios, 40 sweaty bodies packed into a room together. You have to understand human psychology to understand why in the world that why we would be motivated to do that. So I think we'll drop a lot of the social distancing, a lot of the kind of modified physical greetings. You can already see that we're eagerly rushing back to be in each other's proximity, which is, of course, explains the most current spike in COVID infections. Viruses know us. Pathogens know how we roll.
Yeah, there's a lot about spin class that I don't understand either. It's not just psychology. So what do you think are, not pandemic related necessarily, although tangentially, but what do you think are some of the positive new online rituals that you've seen, let's say over, in the social media era versus negative ones?
So I think that a lot of the virtual discussion meeting options are actually profoundly positive. One of the things that I really appreciate about electronic communication, Zoom, these sorts of things, is they diversify the ways in which we can communicate. I personally love the chat function when I teach. I love that we can have kind of ongoing discussions in the chat in addition to conversations, in the kind of open, the open lecture format. You can also create these kind of breakout rooms and just different forums for communicating with each other. I think that's very, very positive. And it's true that it's not the same as exactly the same as interacting in person, but it's not nothing. I think it still fulfills a lot of a lot of our needs. And I am personally profoundly grateful that if this pandemic was going to go down, it happened when there's video chat and telephone communication. Just imagine how much more excruciating this would have been without those electronic platforms. So I think it's allowed us to up our technological game for electronic communication. Not that that's all been positive. I would say that I would also nominate this for what has been most negative. Not so much the electronic conferencing and communication and that kind of thing. A lot of the pandemic has also coincided with what has been on the rise for a long time with sort of social media siloing, this really kind of terrifying infodemic, misinformation, the ability to really silo who you interact with in ways that, because the internet and social media could have been an opportunity to interact with really diverse ideas and different people and different perspectives. Some use it that way. But many do just the opposite, where they self-select into very narrow bubbles of people who think exactly the way that they do, and all kind of mayhem can ensue in those sorts of contexts. So it's not as though COVID is exactly responsible for that, of course, but we sure have all been spending a lot of time online under very stressful, uncertain times, searching for answers. And I think we're in a bit of a pickle in how to extract ourselves from that.
So if you've found some social cohort online and you're in some subset of culture, which I mean, we all are on some degree.
Sure we are.
Or to take a dark example, white nationalism, like whatever it may be, is if you've developed this sort of language, or like, let's just say memes, like, is a
Yeah.
meme some sort of a ritual behavior within a specific subculture?
Yeah, sure it is. It's all about signaling group identity, right? And this is why when you create a new group, your first objective is to create rituals for yourself. And those rituals need to be distinct from another group, right? Because rituals aren't just about, so you and I meet and we assess each other's ritual. This signals, oh, we're part of the same group, or we're not part of the same group. And those are equally valuable, important bits of information. Rituals aren't just about signaling to people you're in a group with. It's also about signaling to people you are not in a group with. And this can be benign. This also can be aggressive and dangerous. So a lot of this kind of branding associated with groups is absolutely ritual. It's ritualized. It's intentional, and it doesn't always serve dark functionality, but it can, right? So rituals can be deployed for good or evil, just like any other aspect of human behavior.
So I think we have time for 3, maybe 4 questions. And Dawn and Eric both asked, how does ritual bring the nervous system into an internal coherence between 2 people or even groups of people?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I actually was just writing about something related to this. So one of the theories of the kind of physiology and psychology of ritual has to do with homeostasis. So we feel a drive to regulate to a state of homeostasis, and in humans, this state is experienced as emotion and as feeling. So we have we motivate in cases of uncertainty or danger. It's one of the reasons why we feel motivated to act, in order to, reestablish a state of homeostasis. And this is something that works at the individual level. It also works at the group level. So if you think about things like reading, praying in reading Psalms, that kind of thing, these ritualistic behaviors in collective settings have often reading them at the same time, reciting them together. These have powerful psychological effects in reducing anxiety. So it's a big part of why we find engaging in synchronous collective activity so soothing.
So John asked about hazing as a ritual.
Oh, absolutely. That's a ritual. I can tell you what the functionality of that is. So a big part of so rituals can be high arousal. They can be low arousal. Harvey Whitehouse has written about the kind of high frequency, low arousal, like collective practices. These would be like your religious ceremonies and things like that. And then your lower frequency, really high arousal activities. These would be your hazing, your kind of scary rites of passage and initiation. And those serve different functions, quite dramatically. The function of hazing is really about costly signaling. So it's signaling to others in your group that I am so committed to entering your group, your organization, that I am willing to suffer personal duress, maybe pain, humiliation, in order to be included. It seems perverse and bizarre, but damn if it doesn't work. It does have that effect. You think about people who've gone through war together, who've gone through really difficult, even hazing experiences together. Even though in the moment it's miserable and they hate it, they look back at this often with this kind of a pride that they've proven themselves to the group. And it's so critical that with hazing, it's a collective practice, right? So if you took the activities associated with hazing and you only did it to one individual, people would consider this abuse and crime. Somehow, if everybody in that group has to do it, it's a bonding experience. Humans are strange, what can I say? But that's what hazing rituals are for, and they're pervasive around the world. Absolutely. Often with those initiation rites and adolescence, the transition from adolescence to adulthood.
So I think we have time for two more before we jump over to the Q&A, the video Q&A for those who signed up for the VIP experience. So Marla asked if you could comment on ritual versus superstition. Where's the line?
Right. So superstition is tricky because it's often, people rarely consider their own beliefs superstitious. People often direct superstition or assess a behavior as superstitious when it's someone else's. So it is true that there can be overlap between superstition and ritual, but that's only because superstitious practices can be social conventions, right? But they're not in that the superstitions can be beliefs that are shared within a population, like not jumping over cracks in a sidewalk or things of that sort, that maybe within that population are considered just the way we do things, but from an outside perspective might look ridiculous and irrational. So I can assure all of you that there are things you do that others would, even the most rational among you, that you do that others would look and say, that's superstitious. There's no, superstition is a product of the human kind of cause and effect reasoning, right? So all of these practices are kind of byproducts of the human mind.
All right, so we're going to close this down. Anne's going to join us in a second, but Regina, final question for you. What are maybe 2 or 3 books you might recommend for someone who wants to learn more?
On ritual, let's see. There's I can post a list of those.
Yeah, we can put it in the event recap if you would like, if that's
okay.
Easier. I don't want to I'm not trying to put you on the spot here.
Well, so there's, I guess the reason I hesitate is there's lots of different types of books on ritual. So ritual is as Anne kind of pointed out, it historically has kind of remained in the domain of anthropology, and there are a variety of different intellectual treatments of ritual within anthropology. Roy Rappaport's Pigs and Ancestors is an incredibly fascinating book on ritual from a kind of evolutionary, biological anthropological perspective. And so there's a bunch of books of that sort, which I could recommend. Cultural anthropologists have written about ritual. There's also a lot of scholarship in religious studies, for example. Ritual for cognitive scientists and psychologists like myself is a relatively new topic. So there's probably not a ton of books written on that. I'm writing one currently, so mine will be out eventually. But I'll post a list based on kind of different treatments of it, which I think is helpful.
Well, I hope when your book comes out, we can have you back on here and you can.
Me too. I would love that.
I'm buying it.
All right. Good.
I want an autographed copy, though.
No problem.
Excellent.
My pleasure.
Well, Cristine, that was, as we suspected it would be, super interesting. This is one of the best aspects that Rick and I claim for our jobs, is that we get paid to listen to people like you. So thank you, National Academy of Sciences. We appreciate that. So we're going to let you go so that you can head over to the VIP Q&A, and we're going to thank everyone for being here. And as we said at the top of our event, it's the close of our season 3, but we are already at work on what we are going to be doing when we come back in the fall. So we've got some great speakers lined up, and so you'll see those invitations in your inbox, and we can't wait to see you again. But I don't know, happy hot vac summer. Get some vacation if you can. That's what we're planning to do. So thank you, and we'll see you in September.
See you in September, everybody.